information integration is not complete as in a single.
Right. So, like, from the outside, it looks like a big toe. From the inside, it feels like a big toe, right? And like, I can make sense of that. You've used the word ego a few times there, and I want to guess that the way you're using the word ego is how religious traditions and philosophers of all kinds might use the word like self, which is not the same thing as consciousness, right? Like, there's this sort of distinction between consciousness, which is just awareness of any kind, and then there's this thing called the self, or the.
Well, sorry about the audio issues in the beginning of the video, right? Okay. So, well, when you're dealing with deeper levels of philosophy, you need to be absolutely clear about what you mean by specific terms, because as you dive in a way to see it, your vocabulary as you go down into the details of your philosophy, into the let's say the more fundamental it is, your vocabulary shrinks with it, right? Because the vocabulary you use is a reflection of the amount of philosophy you have done. If you want to, you use some kind of prose to describe a situation you want to convey to a listener. So you have to use additional terms in order to clarify what you mean. I am sitting here, I am looking over there. There's a lot of, a certain amount of terms being used. But the core terms, like that's an object, or that's an existence, or this is consciousness, and so on, these terms have to be crystal clear what you mean. You can't start philosophizing or debating philosophy, maybe I should say, just throwing up a term as if it's sort of already given. So if these terms are already given, why do we need to discuss them, right? What is that which is missing that needs to be discussed? If these sort of cornerstone terms have already been settled, I don't really see the need for hell of a lot of philosophy. So maybe I'm just special in my approach to philosophy. I can't, I just like it to be coherent, and I don't understand why a guy, for instance, like Bernardo Kastrup, participates in something as fluffy as this, unless this is not about actually getting to good rigid philosophy, but it's sort of pushing whatever agenda he has. And he is on this channel that has had 1.7 million subscribers. Obviously, this is a big platform to push his shit, right? So,
the ego, which is this like unity of conscious experience into like an I and a me, right? And a lot of religious traditions have taken this kind of.
yeah, but it's again this problem with abstractions and categories and so on, that just because you create a category doesn't mean that that category all of a sudden has some kind of existence. And that's one of the problems in the vocabulary of early steps of philosophy, like ontology and metaphysics, and the delineations in this dichotomy of inside and outside and so on, and the me and the I and the consciousness and the mental states and all this, what it's like, and perception and all these terms sort of seems to float around without connection, and they're being used arbitrarily. So no matter how many times you sit down and try to listen to a discussion like this, you just miss some anchor point to start your philosophy. And that's why before you start debating this level, in fact, in all cases of philosophy, but in particular in this case, right, you have to settle on a starting point. You have to work from a reduction base, and you sort of have to, if not agree upon it, at least have a clear view of two different starting points then, and then compare their philosophy when they discuss it, because then they cannot possibly be in agreement with the same terms, right? If you're using a term, both use the same term, it should originate from the same reduction base. But it doesn't seem like they're in accordance with each other's terms. So, and the listener is then just more confused. And maybe that's the game at the end of the day.
Realization that everything is made out of the same stuff, that we're all part of one big kind of mental field, and it's just like localizations, ripples in the waves, as it were, and that's all we are. But it's just one big ocean. To say that realistically, this idea of the individuated self is an illusion, it doesn't exist, or that there's only one self and we're kind of all participating in it. I don't know if you use the word ego in the same way that they're speaking about self, but what do you think about that? And do you believe in Bernardo Kastrup? Do you think that like you exist? You
know? Because all these abstractions and terms and references to objects and cognitions and experiences and dashboards and so on, there are so many moving parts in this discussion that not even these people participating in this debate seems to actually have complete control of what they're saying. So it would be a good idea to have some kind of diagram or some kind of illustration of what you're dealing with in this sort of dichotomy, right? And the contents of either, and what word means what, and so on. A kind of representation of your phenomena and your noumena, for that matter, if you want to go there, like Bernardo Kastrup does, right? And if you want this kind of diagram that gives a clear overview of what you're actually trying to present as your philosophy, well, try my philosophy down below, link below, where I do exactly that. And it's quite simple. There's not really that many moving parts. There might be a few hurdles you need to get over, and if there's a problem in my philosophy, please illuminate me, right? So.
You know what I mean?
No, no, I don't. I don't believe in a permanent personal self. I think the evidence is overwhelming that it's not there. What we call a person.
The evidence, the personal self. What is it? Now it's again this fluffy discussion, right? He can basically say anything he wants because he lives in this mind realm where everything is possible, and nobody can go and check it. So he can come up with all the claims he wants, basically, right? And in my opinion, this is woo-woo mysticism. He doesn't care about things that I actually care about in an everyday, right? The objects I am interacting with and at my direct experience and so on, how do I approach that? How does he approach that? It's sort of, no, that's not important. Let me go into my mind realm, right? Where I can create stories about what's going on that makes me feel good, sort of, right? It's sort of a kind of extremely advanced kind of mystic self-help, this, right? At least, and I've sort of argued for that in prior deconstructions of Bernardo Kastrup's philosophy. There's a whole playlist of, I think I call it Critique of Bernardo Kastrup's philosophy or something like that, metaphysics maybe, right? Critique of Bernardo Kastrup, there's a long playlist. It's around 100 videos, if not more now, right? All included.
Personal self is a narrative. It's an inner story that we mistakenly identify with. It's that person was born that day and is married to that other person and does this or that for a living and living in this address.
Okay, so when you say we, Bernardo Kastrup, which you did earlier in this video, right? What do you mean by we? If that's not a you, that's just a story. Is we all the stories combined or what? And why do we need to address them? Because it's apparently some kind of illusion or something like that. I don't know, right? So no, it's it's always some kind of elimination of your personality, your individualism, right? This is what I sort of see the trend in his philosophy. It's a kind of mental suicide, you could say, right? And he has said earlier in some videos that he has some psychological issues. I don't remember. He's anxiety he was suicidal and he has been, you know, this that, and he has some, he suffers from some illnesses or ailments and so on, right? This to me sounds like somebody who actually wants to kill themselves mentally, if not physically, right? He wants to live with his mind daddy kind of thing, right? Because there's nothing in this that I can actually use for anything. If I want some armchair philosophy and some fancy woo-woo thing going on, yes, I could spend a couple of hours, you know, fabulating about shit going on in another realm I don't have access to. But then I need to go to the toilet, so I need to, you know, objectify the toilet and go to the toilet. And is it my toilet or is it somebody else's toilet? Or, you know, all these everyday things, right? He doesn't care about that, right? He is in his mind realm.
That's the narrative self. What we call the personal self is a narrative. The narrative self. Some psychologists would call it the adaptive self. It's a story in terms of which we can act in the world. And
So, so there is a baseline, some kind, as he appealed to earlier, a baseline subjectivity, right? And it's dissociated baseline subjectivity. It wouldn't be far-fetched to call that some kind of I, right? The I is another term for this particular baseline subjectivity, which is my experiences, right? So there's the me having the experiences. I don't think, I mean, judging from your own standard philosophy, this is not a, they're my memories, right? They're my desires, there's my this, that, and the other, right? So why are there all these effects of being this dissociation that he talks about, that somebody else can see from the outside and so on, and see somebody crying or whatever? If I'm not there, right? It's just ego death. It's individualism death. And this is basically why I keep coming back and deconstructing this guy, because I find him atrocious, right? He appeals to possibly people who already some kind of gray zone of, they have some issues, mental issues, or they have been inflicted with crazy religion since childhood and so on, and they have battled these demons since they were children, right? So he comes in handy and gives them this opportunity to save their abuse, their mental abuse, and comes to terms with it in this ego death kind of way, right? I find it highly problematic, personally.
and defend our
Sorry about that intermission.
ourselves psychologically. And the whole field of psychology called ego defense mechanisms. It's how you defend against the assault of the monstrous world around us. How do you defend your personal agency and even your personal value? So to the
Yeah, says somebody sitting there entombed in his attic with all his little instruments and his philosophy books, right? He's sitting there in his little chamber fending off materialism, right? His little ego gnome castle, right?
meaning that we attribute to this persistent personal self that is not there at all. It's a narrative that keeps changing. Um, so I don't buy into that, but I will buy into what Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, called the self with capital S, because there.
And I might add that this sort of highly analytical um, composition that he has, right, is analytic idealism, right? He's super analytic, but that means he is very good at juggling abstractions, right? So he's not living in the real world. And a person living in the real world will be interested in understanding the actual real world rather than being interested in machines like these old computers that he's repurposing or whatever it is, right? Trying to get up and running again, sitting there fiddling with, right? He, I mean, he doesn't have children. Why should I listen to somebody telling me what life is like if you don't have children and you sit there all night long in your attic, fumbling about with old machines? These automaton, shit, old computers. Right? Why would I want to? I mean, aren't you a normal human being? Don't you have some healthy interest, like going out to, some art exhibition or a rock concert or classical concert, and you enjoy life, right? It seems what I'm hearing is somebody who can't really enjoy life. It's just sort of, yeah, it's me, extrapolating from this, obviously, right? But it just comes along as some goofy weirdo in a way, right?
There is something that is obviously there. It obviously exists. It's the only thing that obviously exists. And that is
the only thing. A thing, what is a thing? What does it mean that it exists? It's just a statement. It's not a philosophy. He's sort of handing down the tablets to you, saying, these are the commandments. These are what exists. This is what is going on. He doesn't give you what follows from Roth and so on, right? Then he goes into, yeah, it's all mine, Then let me tell you what is there. This is not philosophy. This is a priest, basically, right? He's handing you the scripture, the dogmas, the theses, what's it called, right? I don't like when somebody says, this is what is there. Done. Fuck you, right? Give me some elaboration. Give me some reasoning, right? And you can't establish, apparently, an external world. And why would it all be mind rather than some third undiscovered shit that you can't get to? Because I never experienced mind, right? All this appeal to science in your metaphysics is completely ridiculous. You need to have established all that which you want to establish in order to do science. So you can't bring science in to establish that which is necessary to go and do science, right? There's so many huge problems in this philosophy. And then he sits there and saying, you don't have an ego, right? Yourself is just nothing, right? Because I'm suicidal, right? I want to kill myself. So one way I can do it is say, I don't exist. It's only my mind, Daddy, that takes care of me, right?
subjectivity. Philosopher Ite Shani called it core subjectivity, which is what's left when you get rid of all the narratives about what we are. It is that to which experience is given, that which receives experience as the subject of experience. Galen Strawson wrote once that not even a sensible Buddhist would deny that there is the subject and that experience entails a subject. Now, we mistake what that subject is. Is it personal? Is it permanent? I think the answer to both questions is no, but that we mistake the characteristics we attribute to the subject doesn't mean that the subject itself is not there. It obviously is. It is the thing that is theorizing about what the subject is. It is the dative of experience, that to which experience is given. So that self obviously exists.
Um, he's just cycling around in his terms here. I don't want to talk too much about this, right? Maybe this is one of those I should have skipped. But I think there would be a tendency to, as you try some kind of Cartesian reduction, right? Where you try to get, okay, how did I get to this? Well, I'm not sure. Okay, get rid of it, right? So until you get to, I think, therefore I am, right? And apparently to Descartes, at least there was an I, right? And there was something thinking, and that was the I. But I suspect that as you go down in this reduction, the closer you get to the bottom, the harder it is to avoid you bringing in what you want there to be, right? Because as you have gotten rid of other stuff, what is left is only the foundational dogmas, and maybe something like, I think, therefore I am, right? So there's a very high risk that the dogmas that you're not aware that you're bringing along in your backpack as you do this, then you just open your backpack and then smash all these dogmas into your new re-established philosophy, which is building up again from this reduction, right? So you're basically becoming an extreme dogmatist, potentially. You risk that. You have to stay fucking put with what you have, and what you have is only that which you work from. If you reduce to I think, therefore I am, for instance, I don't do that, but I do something, somewhat similar to that, right? And go check my philosophy in order to understand how I approach it. I approach it, right? I approach it. So you can possibly reduce too much, and you sort of lose connection. You reduce yourself into some kind of nothingness, right? A singularity, and there's no direction and there's nothing left, right? That's also a problem, because then you will, I would say, you will bring in your dogmas, because what else could you do? So be careful when you do this reduction that you do it in a way where you don't lose direction of what you're doing. And if you do that, it's as good as certain to me. I would be sure that what you would do is take some dogma and then start building a philosophy on top of that. That's a problematic approach.
I would go as far as to say that the most parsimonious metaphysical hypothesis that is still coherent and empirically consistent today is that this core subject, this dative of experience, is the only thing that exists. And the myriad of different qualities of experience are just different patterns of excitation of the self. You can imagine this self.
See, it just brings in a new term, the patterns of excitation. But what is that? Excitation is some shit going on. What created that excitation? It's just this. It is a scientific approach to doing philosophy. You can't do that. I guess you can do it, but it's dysfunctional. It's not philosophy you're doing. You are theorizing about something you don't have access to. That's science, right? You don't have access to what the hell is going on with that gravity thing you're talking about. So you make some observation and create a formula or something like that, right? So he's doing the same approach. He just can't do it. It's an incorrect approach to doing this kind of thinking, in my opinion, because there is no way to check it. There is no evidence, right? All of the dashboard has already been settled using science. So there's nothing left for you to go and look at. in order to get to an idea of an external world, right? So and maybe that's argument is also circular, but it's like there is no part of any color, sound, smell, touch, and taste, as I've mentioned in an earlier part, that enables me to say, therefore there must be something outside these experiences. There is no outsideness to my experience, as much as I have gotten used to it before I realized the problem. That doesn't mean there is an outsideness to my experience. But what I can say is, and that's my approach, I am going to treat them as if they are a representation of an outside. Right? I'm not saying I've established an outside. I'm just going to treat them as if, right? And this may be maybe the most challenging aspect of my philosophy, the how I deal with the external world. But please check out my philosophy link down below if you want this, spelled out.
Off with big S as the ultimate quantum field, the unified field.
Big ass?
It's that which spans the entirety of nature, and the apparent diversity of natural states are different patterns of excitation of this one self. Just like one guitar string can produce many notes, depending on how it's excited, this one field of subjectivity that nature is can get excited in many different ways, producing discombobulatingly various patterns, practically infinite ones, and yet it's only one thing. This is the ultimate reductive metaphysics. I am a reductionist, by the way, and I'm unashamed, extreme reductionist.
Okay, I'm an extreme, which means that you reduce into mind. Obviously, that if I put two and two together now, right, it must mean that you reduce from some state, which is your everyday state, you reduce down to mind. I would like to see that reduction actually unfold, right? Show me the reduction. Don't just give me, the other day I was doing some philosophy in my attic, and let me tell you, the reduction base is mind. That's what he does. He doesn't give you the actual reduction, right? That's also another critique I pinpointed before. He just says, well, everything is mind. That solves the problem. So it must be the reduction base. But then it's not a reduction, is it? It's just cherry-picked shit, as he has also stated in his defense of his so-called defense of his PhD, where he basically says, you can choose your reduction base. I've never heard anything so stupid, man, right? Well, then it's not a reduction base, dude. All right? It's wishful thinking.
I think everything, literally everything, can be reduced to one thing, and that is the non.
Oh, it can be reduced. So you haven't done the reduction, Awas? Because I have never seen an actually, performing any kind of reduction. Would you mind present your reduction? Where you start and how you end with mind, please. So, well, what's the starting point of your reduction? And how do you sort of argue your way to it must be mind? I would like to see that reduction so I can deconstruct it. Well, I guess you will never see it because there isn't any. I would have to deduce that after so many years where he's talking about this reduction base without presenting any kind of reduction.
On personal self.
So I want to ask you a question that I asked Philip Goff just last week, which is like, why are you not a Hindu? You know, like these guys have been saying for thousands of years that there's this one great big self called the Atman.
Well, why? Who cares that there's some people in the Far East who has a particular set of dogmas? Who cares? Why are you not like these people? It's a stupid question, right? Come on, man.
And in many, Hindu traditions, Atman is the same thing as Brahman, which is like, the ultimate reality. And that's kind of all there is and all that exists. And we all kind of participate in it. Like, is there sort of something in that view that's attractive to you? Have you sort of
Yeah.
ever tried being a Hindu for a bit? I just wonder, hearing you talk like that, feels like I'm sort of reading the Upanishads or something.
Well, I don't know how much baggage would come with the notion that I would try to be a Hindu. I mean, I think what I just told you is, frankly, the only plausible metaphysical hypothesis. But there is more to being a Hindu than arriving at this conclusion I just shared with you. And I don't want to commit to all the rest because
Yeah,
I
right.
don't
I
know
see.
what all the rest is.
Yeah. So okay, so we've got this sort of, great big self. And I really like how you talk about, the ripples in the wave, right? It's a very helpful way of thinking about it. Interestingly, I was just the other day I was having dinner with two people I just met. One of them is a psychiatrist, like studying psychiatry. One of them's a physicist. And I was talking to the psychiatrist about consciousness and about, panpsychism and idealism and stuff. And I can't remember exactly what I was saying, but I was saying something a little bit about how consciousness is sort of like localized, like activity of one big thing. And the physicist, she sort of cropped up and said, "Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a bit like how we physicists think of like electrons, like in the sort of in the quantum wave field." And I was like, well, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting how you think about it in the same way as how we're talking about consciousness? And it was quite a funny moment because, yeah, there's a lot of sense to be made about this. And you're imagining this sort of great big wave, this great big ocean, and there are ripples in the wave. And you've spoken about how like a whirlpool or a ripple in a wave is not a thing. You can't like pick it up and take it out of the water. It is just the water. It's still localized. You can like point at it, but it's like an excitation of this ocean. But it's nothing new. It's nothing separate from the ocean. But the thing is, like, yeah, like a wave is like the same thing as the water. It's made out of the water. But there's like some kind of reason why it forms a wave. Oceans don't just like spontaneously start moving around. There's gravitational factors, earthquakes, wind, whatever, right? If all that exists is just this self, right? I can imagine that if we just all experienced reality all at once, all as one big thing, and I was experiencing the Andromeda Galaxy.
But then you haven't read or studied what he's actually saying. His argument is a non-argument for this. It just does what it does because it is what it is. It's another way of saying I can't get to the shit like that. I'm just going with the idea of ripples, and that gives me what I want. But why they're ripples, I don't know. Why they're excitations, I don't know. But it's something similar to the standard model of, force fields and so on. These 17 fields of shit, right? So he's sort of combining woo-woo and scientific models into some kind of coherent tapestry of something where he just at the end of the say, well, I can't tell you why it is, right? But wasn't that all the purpose about doing metaphysics, in order to get some kind of understanding? If you just move the roadblock from solipsism to somewhere inside metaphysics, and then at that point I can tell you what it is, right? I can't explain anything, it just does what it does because it is what it is. So it's sort of, yeah, okay, you thought that you're going to get some explanation with this fancy philosophy, and then he ends up saying it does what it does because it is what it is. It's like, duh, right? Why did I listen to this guy?
And your thoughts and my thoughts and somebody else's thoughts all at the same time, then cool. But we've got this individualization, right? And even if we describe it as, well, okay, it's kind of a bit of an illusion, it's all just like excitations of one big field. Why? Like, why is there not just one big unit of experience? Why do we get this sort of localizing and excitement? Why do we get electrons cropping up of the quantum field theory? Why don't we just have one big field,
But I sense two questions here. One is, how can the field be self-excitable without an external agency that causes an excitation? Well, this is no different for any metaphysics you get, because science has the very same problem, and the way we solved it in physics is to say that
No. Yeah, but that just goes to show that you can't do metaphysics, right? You can't do metaphysics. What he tries to do is, well, let me bring in some science and say it's probably something like science. Because he has this scientific naturalist upbringing, right? But there is the hard problem, right? So it's time to connect the dots into some coherence. And I mean, it's obviously that's not without merit if you try to do that. But it still has to be done in the right way. You can't just bring shit in that you are, in my opinion, not allowed to use. And you can't use science when you're doing metaphysics. You are violating the basic structure of what you're doing, in my opinion.
The quantum fields fluctuate. They have these spontaneous fluctuations. They are self-excited. That's why there is a universe. That's how the whole thing started. There's nothing outside nature, and yet here's nature doing a great many things.
Okay, so there's something about outside him that he can't get to because all he has, as he says earlier, is his experiences. But he can fabulate about that external world, and then he can say there's nothing beyond that. Okay. How do you know they're not 17 different outsides and each of them are these fields or whatever, right? How the hell do you do this, right? It's a religion. This is a religion. This is mystic woo shit, right?
Right? So it can only be through self-excitation. So that question is always there, regardless of your metaphysics. It cannot be used to differentiate one metaphysics from the other as one being more plausible or not. Self-excitation is inevitable, not only for all metaphysics, but for science as well, ultimately. Why there was a Big Bang? Something had to fluctuate. The Big Bang was a very big quantum fluctuation, but quantum fluctuations are happening all the time.
Well, Big Bang is a theory. Nobody experienced the Big Bang. It's an idea of extending everybody's memory and historical notes and observations and movement of shit and saying it probably started this way, right? But it's still a theory. It's still a model or whatever you want to call it. It's not observation. So to put it short, if your starting point is your experience, then that has to be somehow the reduction base, right? You can create another reduction base, a reduction base that is different from your direct experience. And you have to be very precise what you mean by these experiences, which is the first thing you have, according to what he just said earlier in this series here, right? Or in this video and earlier in my series of the deconstructions here. So it's this, you have some experiences, but let me jump out and grab some abstraction and say this abstraction explains everything. No, that's not how you do good philosophy, in my opinion, because you have just extracted yourself from your own experiences, and now you live in abstraction land, and you're not going to come back, right? You're going to stay in these abstractions because you have put the cart before the horse, and now you can't use the cart anymore because it's in front of the horse, right?
Around us, this is an empirical fact, by the way. In the vacuum, virtual particles pop in and out of existence all the time because of this quantum foam that is always active at the base of the universe. Now, under
just to be clear, just to interrupt briefly, when you say that virtual particles pop in and out of existence, to help people along here, are you imagining, whereas in my head, traditionally I think of this big black space and it's like, bang, there it is, and whoosh, there it's gone. You would probably rather picture this as like a kind of still body of water where there's a little ripple and then the ripple goes away. Something like that, right?
Correct. Okay. Because if you don't imagine things, that's why field quantum theory requires fields. Because if you don't postulate that particles are not things. Particles are just behaviors of the field. They are something the field does and then stops doing. If you don't understand things this way, then you end up having to believe that.
Yeah, but this is another way of. One way you can dismiss his philosophy is you can't use some kind of convenient fiction as the foundation of your philosophy. I simply refuse to do that, right? Because you used some kind of observation to get to this convenient fiction called 17 fields, right? But then you can't use these fields to say that's why I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. Is it so difficult to see the circularity of what you're saying? You are actually violating this, taking the territory out of the map, and then trying to, whatever it is, you know what I mean, right? Somebody came up with the idea of fields, Feynman or whoever, right? And then you say it might be this model might explain our observations. Aha! So there must be fields out there. So when I go and experience, I am experiencing actually fields. No, you're not. Fields are abstractions created by some human beings in order to explain the observation. But an observation is the first step to get to the field. So you can't take the field and place in front of the observations, right? It's a what's a convenient fiction, as he says. Fictions you're not observing. Convenient fictions are not prior to observation, right?
Stuff pops in and out of existence for no reason, which is, I mean, if anything is magical thinking, then this is it, right? Nothing is more magical thinking than that. That's why we say, well, there are no particles. We say particles as a metaphor. And because of historical reasons, there are only ripples on the lake. There is only ever the lake. The ripples are something the lake does, and it may stop doing. So nothing magically popped in and out of existence. It's just that nature was doing one thing and it stopped doing it. That's quantum fluctuations. So that was the first part of your question. Can this field of subjectivity be self-excited? Well, obviously it is. Regardless of your metaphysics, whatever is out there is self-excited because there is nothing outside nature by the very definition of nature. The other question was about why there is a me separate from you. Why?
I think I'll stop here and leave the rest of this. This is a big topic. It will take too long to get through this within the time. Maybe I can do it. Maybe I can do it. Let me see.
Is Bernardo capable of accessing his own inner life, but not Alex's inner life, and the other way around, presumably? Well, that's just evolution. Look, IIT gives us the beginning of a theory of how mental states join together to form complexes or split apart, because splitting apart, the formation of fault lines, leads to more integrated information. It's the best theory. It's a starting point,
but you can do theories about your metaphysics. I mean, it's ridiculous, man, right? It's a complete abstraction. It's a complicated abstraction, but it's an abstraction nonetheless. So it's not fundamental. I'm not buying it. I don't care how many PhD you throw at me, or fancy calculations and so on. I don't buy it, because the observation is the starting point. So that must be the starting point. That must be the reduction base, right? It can't be anything else. Everything else comes after. All the ideas, all the stories, novels of the world, all the science, everything, art and so on, comes after some observation.
it's the best starting point we have.
What do you mean we? You don't have an eye. So what are the we? What's the we if you're not an I? do I have to be an I to participate in a we, or how does that work? Please explain the lack of I and then a we, please.
Given enough time on the surface of this planet, mental states were bound to join together in complexes that found a way to maintain themselves.
So this just mental biology, this, right? It's mental cell biology. It's basically the same as everybody, as naive realists do. He just calls everything mind, basically, right? It's all the same. It's the same. It's cell biology. It's just made of mind, and it's just what it is. And it does what it does because it is what it is. So done. Fuck you, right?
Now,
Mm-hmm.
why was that? Well, because once there was a complex that could maintain itself, that's the one that survived. And the ones
Yeah.
that couldn't maintain themselves are gone.
Yeah, but that's the same problem as with the Big Bang. Evolution is also and can only be a theory because you can never observe evolution. You can only use evidence, not direct observation. The observation of some kind of bone or fossil is not observation of that which it was when it was supposedly still living, right? So evidence is not observation of what it is, it's evidence of, right? The evidence is not you objectify and have experience, direct experience of a fossil, but that doesn't mean you have direct experience of whatever that fossil came from. So that's a theory. So evolution will always and forever be a theory because you can't observe evolution. So in my opinion, because you need all these observations of evidence to get to a theory of evolution, you can't use evolution to explain anything about your observations.
And eventually, one popped out that could spin out other complexes, reproduction.
I can see that.
And here we are.
I kind of want to go a step back though, because like I'm interested in this question of the excitation of the field in terms of just like say a particle, right? Just this one little vibration, just this one excitation. There's this question of like, can something be self-exciting? Maybe there's this ocean that can produce its own waves, but there's this question of like, why? Like, and it's, I understand if you want to say something like, look, we don't really know, but that's not a problem for like my metaphysics. That's just a problem for metaphysics in general, right? And that's fine. But I just wonder if you have an idea why, because if I accept your view that there is just this one big mind, I would expect, I think, it's hard to imagine what I would expect if I was not a unified, agent, but I think I would expect that there would just be sort of one big ball of experience, right? But for some reason, it just like, is it like that it wants to? Can you even speak of desires like in this sense? Like, I'm trying to think of like how to picture what's actually happening there in like your language, as it were.
I get where you're going with it. So I will make a concession, but I will give a few disclaimers if you're okay with it.
Sure.
I'm a naturalist. I think nature does what it does because it is what it is. And
there it is. What? So why do you need a fucking metaphysics at the end of the day, right? Because you're eventually going to tell me, well, it just does what it does, right? And if that is the case, it's actually quite, in some way, it's actually close to my philosophy, which is, well, I don't know if there's an external world. But I can't refute it either, because if it's there, I don't have access to it. Because I'm locked inside my own experiences, in a sense, right? So, since I can't get to it, if I'm working from the idea that is there, and I do treat some of my experiences as a kind of representation of what might be going on out there, the best I can do is it apparently does what it does. I mean, shit happens then, right? I haven't proven, I haven't argued for an external world. You have to be clear about that, and please refer to my philosophy link down below. I haven't just because I started treating shit as if there is an outside doesn't mean I all of a sudden created an outside, right? But it's just this. Why has he written, I don't know, 8 or 10 books about this metaphysics just to tell me it does what it does? It's such a flies in the face of philosophy, in my opinion. Because what it actually does then is still an abstraction based on quantum mechanics, right? Or quantum physics, or whatever it's called nowadays, which is a science which you can't use. It's just another abstraction, right? So he's creating this elaborate story that doesn't explain anything. He says it outright by saying it does what it does. It's the same as saying, I don't know why shit's going on like this, right? But I'm going to call it all mind, and then I've solved the problem. Done.
Nature has its archetypal templates of behavior, and nature's unfolding is the natural unfolding of these archetypal templates of behavior.
Okay, I think I'll stop it here because I'm sort of tired of this particular topic here, right? Which is called why is mental activity something mental localized, and I think I've dealt with that story. So I'll jump to the next one in the next. Why panpsychism doesn't. Actually, I don't care much about panpsychism. So I might jump to 134. Are there distinctions between material objects? That sounds more interesting. So in the next part, I will jump in there. This will probably be the last part. I think so, right? Okay. Please share, like, and subscribe. Give me a comment. What do you think? And beyond that,